I'm going to start my talk by recalling something that John Holden once said. John Holden was President Barack Obama's chief scientific advisor. And at a UN summit, he once said that with climate change, we really have three options: mitigation, adaptation, and suffering. So my talk rests on the premise that whilst we should never give up on mitigating climate change, it's time that we start talking about adaptation and suffering. So the first part of my talk is really a recap of a study that we did, exploring the factors of socioeconomic and ecological resilience that helped communities cope following a natural disaster. And the second part of my talk is about a livelihood project that we did that helped communities build that resilience. So, as you may recall, in 2013, October, Cyclone Fallon hit Orissa, Ganjam district. Exactly a year later, in 2014, Cyclone Hudhud made landfall near Visakhapatnam city in Andhra Pradesh. Both these cyclones extremely severe. Their landfall wind velocities were up to 230 kilometers an hour. And they both impacted Visakhapatnam district and the city, and it caused immense impacts. And an assessment of the damages and the losses incurred was about 90,000 crores. So, in the last few years, nature has repeatedly reminded us that our climate is changing, and often towards the extreme. You know, we're already experiencing temperature differences, we're already experiencing shifts in season, and the frequency and intensity of those natural disasters is increasing. But what's even more worrying is that the period between those natural disasters is decreasing. And that period is when really we start to cope with the impacts of the previous disaster. So we're already made vulnerable by that. And then we have another disaster hitting us before we're ready for it, increasing our vulnerability. And this is happening more and more along the coastal regions of India. And it's particularly worrying because a third of our population lives along the coast or within 50 kilometers of the coast in India. So that's not to say that across coastal India we've had efficient disaster preparedness put in place. In 1999, when the super cyclone hit Orissa, we lost about 10,000 lives. But when the cyclone Fani hit earlier this year, we lost 16 lives. So it's not about our disaster preparedness is getting better, but the real challenge is after the disaster. It's rebuilding the damaged infrastructure. It's returning to normalcy. And that's where we're facing a lot of challenges in India. In 2015, a study said that the economic costs from the impact of climate change on natural coastal infrastructure ranged from about 2,000 billion rupees for a city like Bombay to about 3.8 billion for a district in Orissa like Baleshwar. And amongst the policy responses that are available to us are mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation addresses the root causes, so the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and while adaptation intends to lower the risks posed by the consequences of climate change by building resilience within our systems. So both approaches are of course necessary, and even if emissions were to drastically decrease in the next decade, adaptation will still be needed to deal with the changes that have been put into motion already. Despite this, there is absolutely no available data on the investments and expenditure in building climate resilience infrastructure in India. And in fact, the Disaster Management Act, which came into play in 2015, clearly prioritizes disaster preparedness and mitigation over resilience building and adaptation. So adaptation is closely linked with resilience building, like I mentioned. It's about transforming our systems to absorb shocks, to withstand those shocks, and the ability for the systems to cope with the shocks following any disruptions. And And in 2005, while I was working with IUCN, with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, we began to start exploring the local factors of resilience that were helping local communities, coastal communities, cope with the impacts of the natural disasters. And so we looked at some of the environmental and socio-economic factors that helped communities start coping and cope better with it. And we focused our work in Andhra Pradesh about 6 months after Cyclone Hudhud had hit. We worked with the Institute of Economic Growth based in Delhi, specifically with Dr. Sadamani Das, who is the NABARD chair professor at the institute. We published a paper on it, but this is Visakhapatnam where we worked. We were looking at 2 questions specifically. How did households suffer from and cope with the impacts of the cyclone? And what were the social, economic, and environmental factors that helped some households cope better and recover better from those that struggled to do so? Broadly, we worked with about 900 households in 15 villages in the district. This is the paper that we published, and I'd really encourage you to read it. It goes extensively into the kind of stats analysis that was done and the methodology itself, which I won't focus on. I'll talk more about the results that we found. But all 900 households in 15 villages that we worked in had been adversely affected by Hudhud because they were in close proximity to its landfall. And we collected information on the financial damages suffered by the households, what they thought constituted normal, and we also had control groups. So we had villages outside of Visakhapatnam that had similar demographic and livelihood profiles to compare against. We also studied the coastal vegetation extensively, looking at the diversity and the extent of different types of vegetation in and around these villages. So what did we find? It became apparent pretty quickly that the effects of these disasters were disproportionate. This isn't surprising. We know that climate change is a risk multiplier, and that poverty is exacerbated by the loss of particularly nature-based livelihoods. So one of the occupational groups, or the occupational group that suffered the most, was the fishermen. And their losses from just the impacts of Hudhud exceeded their average annual incomes. They were also losing days of work because they suffered indirect and direct losses to their equipment, to their boats. But even 6 months after the disaster happened, they were reporting reduced catches. And these were trawlers as well as small-scale fishermen. But they did mention, especially within villages in and around mangroves, that they were still able to do a bit of subsistence fishing in and around mangroves because the mangroves had pretty much absorbed the shock of these cyclones, and the ecosystem functionality within those regions was still pretty much intact. So we found that there were 4 types of households that really demonstrated higher resilience. Those that were female-headed, those that were headed by people with a secondary or higher education, those families that lived in concrete houses, and those that were located behind thick coastal vegetation. And the reason that when we delved deeper, we found that the female-headed households, women were less risk-averse, so they were not partaking in those riskful livelihood options that were directly dependent on nature. Also, the people within, families within those female-headed households were engaged in very different livelihoods. So they had diversified their livelihoods. There was tailoring, and there were people working in offices, as well as people fishing and farming. And those with the secondary house school education were able to cope quicker because they were able to understand the rights that were afforded to them. They understood that they were entitled to compensation, so they were accessing that. And those within concrete houses, of course, it's better than the kacha houses, which were just blown away with the winds and the wave action. And the homes located behind coastal vegetation, these were when I say thick coastal vegetation, I mean at least 2 to 3 meters wide. And it wasn't just the mangroves that helped them. It was also multi-species plantations, which were dominated by palmyra and casual plantations. But the infrastructure that was positioned behind monoculture plantations did nothing, they suffered. The monoculture plantations did nothing to protect them. So, as I also mentioned, there were a lot of people that said that those who were living behind the mangroves were able to cope better. Not just because they lost less, but also because they were able to, food security was better, they were able to fish and get food that way. But 86% of the households said that they would take at least 2 years to recover to what conditions were before the cyclone. One of the biggest findings that we found was that the richer income households suffered greater losses and were taking longer time to recover, and that's simply because they had more fixed assets. Assets that couldn't be moved when the cyclone came. And therefore, just wanted to say, they had more stuff, they lost more stuff. So the majority of households that we interviewed had not yet received the compensation that the government had promised them. And the ones that did, which were closer to the Visakhapatnam city, said that the compensation was insufficient for them to actually bounce back in any meaningful way. Only 1 out of the 900 households had insurance, and that was for crop insurance. So developing countries were already extremely underinsured. And in part, especially from the climate change impacts, because those risks and uncertainties and the complexities are quite extreme. So it's difficult for insurance companies to model what those impacts will be. So there is a need, however, to communicate and increase awareness amongst the communities of the benefits and opportunities that insurance will afford them in terms of coping, but also in smart asset investment and financial saving plans, and basically to increase their financial security. So the study is important in the context of providing entry points at multiple levels of decision making for fostering climate change development, because resilience is multidimensional and there are different aspects that we need to look at and strengthen in order to build resilience of communities. Although in recent times there have been significant obstacles to this, of course the liberalization of our coastal regulations has led to a lot of unsustainable development along our coastlines, which has made our cities and our surrounding areas much more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Having said that, many nations and communities are waking up to the fact that we need to take steps to build resilience into our systems. And we do need greater action and more ambition in doing this. But there are a lot of advantages in investing in disaster and adaptation investments. The first dividend of resilience is, of course, when the disaster strikes, you're saving lives, you're reducing infrastructure damage, you're reducing economic costs overall. But there's also added benefits regardless of the disaster. So you are also encouraging households to save and build their assets. You're promoting entrepreneurship. You're stimulating firms and people to invest and innovate. And then there's co-benefits. There's opportunities to build social cohesion as people come together to support each other, in the coping process. There's several other benefits, and one of the ways, so what does this look like on the ground? So one of the other projects that we worked on was the integrated mangrove fisheries farming system. And we worked on this project in Andhra Pradesh, in the Krishna district, in a village called Salabandi. However, in 2007, this system was actually conceptualized for a totally different reason. In the 1970s, shrimp farming started increasing phenomenally across our coastline and across South and Southeast Asia. It started blossoming so much so that they started destroying mangroves to build these shrimp farms. Farmers started converting their agricultural lands into shrimp farms. And then because of monoculture, because of the use of artificial feed, because of several other unsustainable practices, disease started building in these ponds. The quality and the cost of the market value of these ships decreased, and the environmental impacts of this were phenomenal. So in 1996, the Supreme Court of India banned intensive and semi-intensive shrimp farming across India. And that had a phenomenal social impact because farmers they had converted their farms, and because of the increased salinity in the pond, they couldn't go back to agriculture. So a lot of them abandoned their ponds in search of manual labor, in search of other livelihoods. And so in Andhra Pradesh alone, they estimated that there was about 300 square kilometers of abandoned shrimp farms. So the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, in recognition of this, conceptualized the integrated mangrove fishery farming system. The system is quite simple. You have water coming in with the tides from one end. You grow fish and other commercially important species within the ponds, and you have water going out the other end. Gravitational pumping, tidal fluction happening. You don't need any external energy source to aerate the water, to flush out the water, to clean the water. They're growing local species within the ponds, and you also have bunds that are coming through on which you can grow halophytes. So halophytes are salt-loving species, and they do have nutritional benefits, so you can sell them at the market as vegetables and for other nutritional benefits. So, and then around the pond, you plant mangroves. So the mangroves, with the leaves and everything that's falling into the pond, you're getting detritus and organic matter breaking down into the ponds, so you can grow crabs at the bottom of the ponds, which feed on this detritus. You can grow fish in the middle, and some people have even started growing vegetables on floating rafts at the top of the pond. In 2015, we took this model and we approached the Yanadi tribe in Andhra Pradesh. So village about 15 years ago. They are landless, they are semi-nomadic, and they were living in the mangroves in temporary housing. And they were working for the farmers in and around the region. They were collecting snakes and frogs and rats from their fields, and for every animal that they caught, they were getting 5 rupees. But they had no livelihood security, no food security, and they're extremely vulnerable. But they were depending on the mangroves for subsistence fishing and for shelter. So when we approached them with this idea, they were very welcome about it because they had grown used to the mangrove system, they had grown familiar with it, so they wanted to work in a similar system. And we did 2 things. First, we asked some of the farmers there who had abandoned their shrimp farms if we could start using their shrimp farms, and they agreed. We also approached the revenue department. So this village is surrounded by mangroves, but they are not protected, and the land is owned by the revenue department. And the revenue department decided to sign a formal agreement with the community in that area to give over the land for about 10 years to the community on the condition that they take care of and restore the mangroves in the region. So in some cases, as you can see in the bottom, we used the natural channels that were going through the mangroves. We simply dug them a little deeper to set up the ponds. In other cases, we used some of the existing abandoned ponds, expanded them a bit, and the community was hands-on. They worked on these ponds completely. They decided the designs. So some of them didn't like the ideas of the bunds coming in. They wanted little islands in the middle of the pond. So we changed it according to what they wanted. Sorry, I'll just go back. The ponds are designed in a way that 35% of the space is left for mangroves, and about 70-75% of the space is for the growth of halophytes and fish and crabs. So we found that the quality of the system does not really compromise on the quality and the size of the produce, both of which have 80% of the time in these 10 ponds that we had built been comparable to wild catch. The farmed fish are selling at the local markets at market prices, but they also have the potential to sell more if they were better branded and marketed. Some enterprising beneficiaries have also started kayaking tourism within their ponds to gain a little extra money. And we found that within 4 months of the ponds building the ponds, some of the families were able to sell their produce for up to about 15,000 to 20,000 rupees a kg. So over 3 years, they were able to get enough money to build concrete housing on the land, which the Revenue Department agreed to. So this has already started increasing their resilience to natural disasters. But one of the most important things that we found was that the adjoining fishermen community has also started using a similar methodology, started doing their own aquaculture, using the integrated system, started doing their own aquaculture. And they reported that the biggest benefit to them has been that in times of need, they would borrow money from loan sharks. But now they can just sell the produce as and when they need the money and they get money immediately. So that vicious cycle of debt that was ongoing is slowly being dealt with. One of the other things that was really cool that came out of the project was that this tribe, the 10 families, were not included in the population census of India. Because they were landless and because they were moving around, they just had never been included. But the panchayat of this district and the village heads decided after these families had started their own livelihoods, they built houses there, to integrate them into the village. And they are now included in the population census of India. And since the Revenue Department had requested that the mangroves be taken care of, we also formed a committee. So we have an 11-member committee. It's partly from the fishing village as well as some of the people from the Yanadi tribe. And 7 of those members are women, and they have started a fund. So a lot of, they've asked that the farmers who are doing agriculture to give a certain percentage of their profits to create an adaptation and resilience building fund so that when natural disasters do hit, there is a certain amount of money to help people. Of course, we didn't do this alone. There were a lot of people involved. The local governments were really important. They played a huge role. They provided the land, they provided the support. Although IUCN was one of the first to pilot this, GIZ and UNDP then came in to help expand some of these ponds and to replicate and upscale some of this project. But they also started helping people diversify their livelihoods, so providing them with skills for other livelihoods. There were vegetable gardens that were planted and other things that happened. The technical and research organizations were very important. They provided some of the fingerlings for the ponds. They helped capacity build the community in how to manage the ponds and so on, and how to monitor the impacts that the ponds were having on the external environment and on the mangrove habitat. We had an amazing local organization without whom this would have totally been impossible, because they were really the ones that had built trust with this community, and therefore the community trusted us to come in and help them and implement this project. I've also put the central government and NABARD in there because in terms of upscaling these efforts, we need a lot of funding, and the Climate Adaptation Fund, which is managed by NABARD, and is being coordinated and the funds are being distributed through, are extremely important, and we put forward a proposal to ask that this can be upscaled along the east coast of India. So if we just look at the report card on just one livelihood, in terms of improving the governance and management of the mangroves for protection, we haven't given it a very high scoring because we haven't had the funds to actually go back and evaluate if the committee is doing their job and the mangroves are actually being managed properly. But in terms of mainstreaming climate change into agriculture and looking at the current needs as well as the future needs, we feel that this model has done pretty well, because in the recent natural disasters, even though there was inundation from saline water, it didn't affect the ponds so much because they were already saline water ponds and they were using the local species. So there was no adverse impact to that, and communities could go straight back to farming their fish and crabs following the disaster. But in terms of it being a sustainable livelihood auction that was accessible to other vulnerable coastal communities, it didn't fare so well because you do need land for this. The revenue department could get up at any moment and say that they want to use this land for a different purpose. Because it's not protected land, it's not under the forest department or anything like that. It can be used for other purposes. And also vulnerable communities are often landless, they don't have their own land to build these ponds. And further to that, one of the things that we've been really challenged by is that the fish are currently being fed with bycatch and organic matter from kitchens. But we don't know how much this system is putting pressure on the fisheries and bycatch issue. So that also we need to monitor and make sure that it's not having adverse impacts on that issue. But in terms of increasing coping capacities to climate impacts, we have helped build better financial security. We haven't really delved into looking at how we can enhance market linkages and bringing better consumers who will pay more for this produce. So that's something that we need to work on. But there is decreased vulnerability through the food security, through strengthened food security, because now that they have the farms, even if they're post a disaster, they still have food, even if they don't have enough to sell. And in terms of mitigating the impacts of climate change, the mangroves are sequestering and absorbing carbon. We just haven't had the money again to go and check out the extent of that. But all in all, these are challenges that we are working to fix. And every village, every district, this whole system will have to be adapted and changed according to the needs of that community. So this system looks different. In Tamil Nadu, where we've implemented it, it looks very different to what we've done in Orissa, for instance. And just before I finish, I would like to show you this map. This was modeled by an insurance company, FM Global. This is all open source, so you're free to go look it up and look at how they modeled it as well. This is the map of Goa, and this is the flooding risk that they anticipate. As you can see, we in Goa are quite vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We've got amazing rivers, we've got an amazing coastline, but that does mean that we are vulnerable, particularly because we have been systematically destroying a lot of those natural protective barriers along our coast in favor of development. So there are results from this study and from this work that can really inform our adaptation solutions in Goa, and that's something that we need to really start thinking about before things get worse, because climate change is going to get worse, the impacts of climate change are going to get worse, and the longer we put off these adaptation efforts, the more difficult and more expensive it's going to become.